Molly Straub's middle school journal comes to an abrupt end on Tuesday, May 6th, less than 3 weeks into the 100-year flood.
Do you think this giant wall of water is gonna come and take out your whole house?
Her first mention of the waters is almost a month earlier, on Thursday, April 17th. The next day, Molly notes briefly, her entire neighborhood is to be evacuated.
We turned the radio on and they were screaming on the radio that the dike had broke and everyone needed to go. Get out, get out. The water's coming, get out.
For anyone living along the usually dormant Red River, the warnings are inescapable. A punishing record flood is coming.
We were acutely aware that we were facing a crisis, that it was going to take extraordinary efforts. Simply couldn't hold back that volume of water.
Just 2 blocks from the Straub's house, a thin wall of hastily assembled sandbags stands as the last line of defense against the frigid waters.
It was just sheer panic. Sirens were blaring and the National Guard was driving down the street screaming on megaphones, everybody get out. It was just a cluster of chaos. People were running with TVs and others were trying to get in to get their pets and others were trying to get out to get their kids.
Like the rest of the residents of this small North Dakota city, Molly and her mother had expected to beat back the Red River, as they had the year before, and the year before that. But these waters are different, hostile, and relentless.
This was extraordinary. We saw the face of God right there.
With nowhere else to go, water begins filling the low-lying areas, forcing entire neighborhoods underwater in just a matter of hours.
There's 50,000 people in Grand Forks that have now been evacuated, and they're all looking for a place.
It's an unparalleled disaster, triggering the United States' largest mass evacuation since the Civil War. And Molly and her family need to escape the city by any means possible.
And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters with Jason Tramm. We're streaming live from historic Ocean Grove, New Jersey. Thank you so much for joining us for a unique podcast community where we explore the triumphs and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much for helping us grow. We recently hit 1,537 subscribers. Thank you so much. Please hit that subscribe button and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. To see our over 200 past episodes, check out our website at www.jasontram.net. You can also join our mailing list to hear more about our podcast. If you don't see our podcast, you can hear us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts as well. We're new to those platforms, but we are starting to add more and more of our episodes to that. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for helping us become the fastest growing musical culture podcast. We have a wonderful guest today. We have an Emmy Award-winning composer, Mr. Brian Katona, who is a composer, orchestrator, arranger, and conductor. His recent film and television credits include The Red River Flood, The Long Hair, a Telly Award winner, Venice Short Films winner, and Global Music Awards winner, The Builder, an Emmy winner for Best Musical Composition. The list goes on and on and on. Welcome, Brian Katona.
Thank you, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
Brian, I haven't seen you in years, but we go back. So what have you been doing the last few years?
Quite a bit of composing, conducting, playing the piano and the organ, trying to keep busy. But yeah, it's wonderful to see you since our days at Rutgers. So it's great to reunite and have a bit of a chat today.
Always great to, you got your doctorate and you've been applying that steadily to your composition craft and your conducting craft. So did you always know you wanted to be a composer?
That's a very good question. I think deep down I did. I remember when I was a very little kid, the best of my ability, 4 or 5, 6 years old, I would always go over to my relative's house and they would have a little spinet or console piano, and I would immediately gravitate toward that instrument and make, banging sounds loud on the low end and high sounds and try to create some sort of a story in my mind. But I think the story was only in my mind, as the relatives would say, hey, get that kid some piano lessons so he can actually make some sense of what he's doing. And thankfully, my parents did do that. So around the age of 10, actually, which is a bit late, I started taking piano lessons and just fell in love with it, trained classically, but always had an interest in film score work and musical theater. Grew up, of course, watching Steven Spielberg films and being immersed in the scores of John Williams, which really influenced my love of film music. So that was sort of the beginning. It began with the keyboard, and that's still where I sit.
Well, but you listen to some of the greatest. I mean, John Williams' scores still stand up. Boy, he just knows how to write a melody and to adapt it and just capture the moment, right?
Oh, it's fantastic. We were just up at Tanglewood this past weekend, and John Williams does a film music concert every summer, except for last summer because of COVID. And he's, I think, 89 years old, but he is still going strong and conducting, and it's just a beautiful thing to see. I think he's writing the score for Indiana Jones 5 as we speak. So he's
really
not stopping.
Wow.
So it's a real inspiration, actually.
So who are some of your greatest influences as a composer?
Well, certainly John Williams, as we were talking about. Other film composers, I love Danny Elfman, I love Hans Zimmer. Some of the newer folks coming up are fantastic as well. And then again, as being a classical musician, always influenced by the great masters of Mozart, Beethoven, Mahler, as a pianist, Liszt, Chopin. I mean, you name it. And I think all those things that you study as a youth really influence everything, whether you know it or not. Things come out in your compositions and in your writing because you have studied those in such an in-depth fashion throughout the years.
I remember when we were students that you were a Bernstein fanatic.
That's right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, Leonard Bernstein. I'm a huge fan. I did my doctoral thesis on Bernstein, on his Missa Brevis, which was a small mass that he wrote toward the end of his life. But a real inspiration there as well, as a conductor and a composer, and as a humanitarian and a real supporter of music.
As an American musician, Bernstein you can't emphasize how important he was as being one of the absolute international level artists, Americans, especially conductors. He's one of those trendsetters for all of us.
Very much so, yes.
So tell us about your artistic path. When did you first start composing, and what did you compose for?
So I think, again, when I was a kid, I started off on the piano, playing, learning, and developing that way. And in school, I would write little pieces here and there, but nothing really that necessarily stuck. In high school, I started to write some piano music, some choral music, got really big into choral conducting, so I would write some music for the choirs and things of that nature. And then that really developed throughout the years into various permutations of writing for church choirs or writing for orchestras. I tended to find that I would write for whatever the occasion would be. So if I was conducting an orchestral concert, I would try to write an orchestral piece so I could have something in mind programmed, or a brass ensemble, or a string quartet, or a chorus. So anything that was happening, I would try to write something for, just to gain the experience and to develop my repertoire. The film scoring thing didn't start until, probably 10 years ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that was really the beginning of that journey. And it's a funny thing because people always ask, well, how do you get started? How do you get into the business? And it's not one of those things where you put your resume out and say, hey,
I would imagine not. So many composers that, and there's, how do you break in? How did you get your first? Tell us about your first scoring gig.
So the real first job that was substantial was a documentary called The Town That Disappeared Overnight, which is based in New Jersey. So it's in the Round Valley area, which I think is 100.
I've been there, and I'm a history fanatic, so I love this.
So it was a reservoir. So they had a town there. It was in the valley, and the government essentially moved all of the houses out of the town, loaded them up on trucks, filled the whole valley with water, and there was this whole conspiracy behind it. Real kind of heartfelt, heart-wrenching story to some extent. But how I got involved with that. So we used to live in Los Angeles, And a buddy of ours, my wife, worked on a couple TV shows. I think it was Shop to Drop was the name of one of the shows. And one of the folks that worked on the show, Eric Althoff, was from New Jersey. And we got to talking, and a real nice guy. He sang in my church choir, so had that really nice personal connection. And then I just started talking about, I compose, and I don't just play the piano. I don't just conduct. I compose as well. And he's like, what do you like to compose? And, I've always wanted to get into film music. And he's, I know a guy. I know a guy from New Jersey that I went to high school with. And his name is David Kuznicki. And he was working on this project, The Town That Disappeared Overnight. So Eric put David and I together, and we had some conversations. And he said, this is what the story is about. And he showed me a few minutes of this clip. And I was just fascinated. And I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to get in and start developing my film scoring work. So we did the whole thing virtually. It was probably, I think, a 40-minute documentary, so a substantial amount of time. But it was just going back and forth. And again, this is 10 plus years ago, so the technology wasn't quite there. So we're sending files via email and this, that, and the other. But it was through that personal connection that I made that initial break, per se, into the business.
So what was it like putting together a 45-minute musical selections for a movie, for a documentary like that? How do you choose your musical styles? How do you make it fit the topic? How does that work?
So for me, back then I do things a little differently now, but at the root of it, I'll always, sit down to the piano and try to sit down and, watch the film while I'm playing. And then sometimes ideas just come into my head as I'm watching, whatever the ideas might be. And then once I have something, a theme, a motive, an idea, I'll expand that. I'll try to do recording and then send that off to the director and say, hey, David, what do you think about this? Does it fit? And he'll say, yes, it's great, or no, try something else, try this different direction. And that's sort of the key for me, is to tap into the emotional subtext of the film, whatever that might be. The heart of it, what is the director trying to convey? And if I can find that musically, then that's sort of cracking the shell. And then from that point, everything spills out and it just takes time. But it's quite the process, and it's sort of the fun process. You noodle and you find the right notes, the right pitches, the right harmony, the right rhythm. And it's that gut feeling that, I think it's right. And once you have it, you kind of have it. It is, and the latter films that we've done, I've been able to do the mixing and sound editing as well. So being able to really work on and control the whole soundscape, from the sound effects to the dialogue to the score, is a fun process. And to see the finished product up there on the screen is a real joy and reward.
Now, sometimes do you use live musicians when you're scoring, or do you mostly use digital, or do you use both? How does that work?
I have, unfortunately, due to budgetary constraints, I tend to do most of the work in the box, as they say. I use Pro Tools as a composer, which a lot of film composers do. A lot of them don't. A lot of them use Digital Performer. But things tend to end up in Pro Tools as far as the audio mixing. So I just kind of do things there. When I was in the Aspen Music Festival in 2002, I did some film scoring work there as part of their fellowship program, and that's when I got introduced to Pro Tools, and I've been using it ever since. So yeah, generally speaking, it's figuring out what plugins to use, what sample libraries, and that can be hit or miss, and it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, I'm sure that making that work to your artist's specifications and to your ear. I mean, it's gotten so good. MIDI has gotten so good over the years that it's sometimes really hard to distinguish.
Yeah, it really has. And as a conductor, I always champion live musicians. And if I can, hopefully down the line, budgetary constraints aside, always choose to do that whenever possible. But yeah, the samples have gotten really great, which in a way is dangerous. That's why I try to still compose at the piano. So for example, this flood documentary, big project, the Red River flood, we can talk about that more, but it's about an hour length, maybe a little bit more. So the question is, where do you start? And you have all of these plugins, all of these sample libraries. And as a composer, especially up and coming composers, they can get really bogged down into the joy of finding the next best library. And if I had this library, then my score is going to be better. Or if I bought this one, it's going to sound better. And sure, it's so much fun, but you get sucked into that and then you forget to compose. So same process. I'll sit down, look at the screen, and then pen and paper or pencil and paper, I'll try to compose at the piano. So for example, this documentary that we just finished, the Red River Flood, based on a flood in 1997. I think they showed the clip at the beginning here.
Yeah, we had it playing at the beginning, and it was a stunning looking flood. I mean, there's just incredible amounts of water those poor people had to live through.
It was a huge natural disaster. I think 1997, one of the greatest disasters in American history. Similar to the town that disappeared overnight, kind of a theme where people were evicted from their homes. People would sit on the rooftops as the river would just flood in. Real devastating kind of thing. So I had to try to find the heart of that in the music to honor the travesty, but also the elevation of the people overcoming this flood, overcoming this huge disaster. So I would watch the film, and then I could play a little bit. I just toyed around with the idea of the descent into the flood, right? So the descending passage underwater almost. So almost like a Pascale or a Chaconne, just a descending chromatic passage. So just that sinking down into the depths.
That neo-Baroque, that descending tetrachord is always powerful from the Baroque until now. It works beautifully.
It is. Yeah, it's
and what a great melody! What a great kind of catchy melody, and it's got full of gravitas and passion. Really gorgeous.
Thank you. And saying the melody, so the melody does come in after that, and that's sort of, in my mind, the representation of not the flood but the people. Which the tune is something to this effect. A little melancholy, right? Builds, maybe as the flood rises, right? Trying to keep things higher. So it's kind of building and expanding and trying to pull on the emotional heartstring without being too melodramatic at the same time.
It's amazing. So how long did it take to finish this project? How long did it take to come up with the themes and then to flesh it out with orchestration? Give us a time frame of how long it took to do this project, for example.
So I always like to answer that question by starting with how long it takes the filmmaker to make the film, because this is what I like to impress upon younger composers too, that a director will spend 5, 10, 15 years on a film, and it's their baby. It's their project. They've poured their heart and soul, second, third mortgage into the film, right? And then you, as a film composer, myself, get hired at the very last minute, because that's post-production, right? Pretty much everything's wrapped up and done and tied up. And then this guy or female or whoever has worked on this film forever, and they say, here you go, hand it over to the composer. And you've got a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month tops, and you can make this an amazing film. Or with your music, you can kind of send it down in the wrong direction as well. So for this one, I probably had about a month, somewhere in that neighborhood. But knowing all of the history behind it, I knew I had to work quickly and accurately and really tap into the heart of the film to honor the years spent that the director put on this. So in terms of process beyond that point, so I would get the film. In this case, we did it scene by scene. So I would do scenes 1 through 4, and the director would send me those clips. I would watch it over and over. We would do sort of a spotting session via email, because the director lives in North Dakota, so we couldn't meet in person. But due to technology, it still works. And we would try to find hit points. I want this emotion here. I want this type of feel here. And the goal when talking to a director is to talk not so much in musical terms, like, oh, you want a violin passage or a cello or whatever, but emotional context. You know, the character feels this, or the mood is this. And then you get a sense of what they want in that scene. So once you get a feel for that, then I would sit down at the piano or in my studio and just start to compose, try to do a rough sketch just with a piano score or a reduced score, and always trying to write 2 pictures so I can hit all of those points. And it's very methodical. Was it Stravinsky that said the more restrictions that you have, the better composer that you are to some extent? and I believe that's true because
Yeah, I love the stories of the great composers writing ballets. I think it was Tchaikovsky called Nutcracker making sausages.
Yeah, right. Well, and it is, and especially that way with film music, because you've got 1 minute and 7 seconds, and at 37 seconds this happens, and at 40 seconds this happens, and then there's dialogue here, so you can't have anything there. So it's a real carved out thing. But for me, I find that really rewarding, actually, because I have a map.
You have to write with such incredible constraints. You really have to know your craft. You just hearing you at the piano and just demonstrating. It's like you were able to just demonstrate very quickly the emotions you wanted to get across, how it came across. Yeah. The different ideas, the symbology behind it. I mean, that's what it's all about, the craft.
Yeah, it really is, and it's fun, and you have to think outside the box. Like, you can't just say it's going to be 4/4, it's going to be D major for 3 minutes and go. Well, no, it's D major for a bar and a half, and then it's quarter equals 68, and then the next bar it's quarter equals 112, and then it's a string for 2 measures because there's dialogue, and it's all this stuff. So I try to start with the music first before I get, like I said earlier, before you get into the sound libraries and the plugins, because that's the fun stuff. That's the orchestration as it is now. So once I have the music kind of written, then I'll start layering on the orchestration, having thought of the orchestration as I'm going, sort of knowing where I'm leading. And then generally speaking, I tend not to write out every single part because I'm playing everything in myself. So I don't necessarily need to do that unless I am using a live musician. So yeah, it's quite the process, but you have to work fast too. That's the thing.
What is something you'd tell yourself when you're writing now, and you're at this point in your career? What would you tell yourself when you're first starting?
I would tell myself nothing is too precious that it can't be thrown away. As a composer, if you're just writing a piece of music and you're composing and trying to create the greatest piece of music ever, you hold on to that and you think, this is my baby, this is my precious thing. Well, as I said earlier, it's the film that's the most important thing. Dialogue is supreme. Sound effects always trump music. Pretty much everything trumps music. So your job is to just be there and support the score and support the film. And then there are moments where the music will shine forth. But again, my advice is to say, hey, don't be willing to drop stuff. And I've had that before, where I've sent in 2, 3, 4 minutes of music and I've loved it, and I thought, oh, this is the best thing I've ever written. Then the director will come back and say, well, it's great, but maybe not for here. Maybe not the right idea. And instead of being upset,
put that in the catalog of ideas to be used on another project, like Handel.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. So you have to be willing to let go.
That's a good point. That's a good lesson to teach young people. We have a lot of young people listen to the show, and that's really important to learn. That, that's just, it's a collaborative. Music by its very nature is a collaborative art form. You're always collaborating. I'd say music's also a people business too, because your colleagues. I have similar process when I do ballets. I work with a ballet choreographer and director, and we do a lot of original ballets. It's a similar thing. Every project is a unique collaboration. We have professional dancers, we have live musicians, and we have to make it work. And it's constantly like we need this 30 seconds shorter, so we're trimming down the music. Yeah. Sometimes it's an original composition, sometimes it's a famous piece by Mendelssohn, and we're like, what do you want me to take? This is like cutting the Holy Scripture words out. We're taking a sentence out to make it fit better, but it's a collaborative art form. That's what makes it exciting.
It is. That's the real joy, and to see so many different types of artists come together in that situation in ballet or in film. There's so many different people behind the scenes. And to really look toward that finished product and to say, hey, it really did take a team to put this together, and everyone should be very proud of all the work they put in.
Yeah, just like any stage production, it's special because you have all these different brains coming together to make something truly creative. Yeah. What was the first collaboration you won that one of your many awards?
So the first big one was probably the Emmy Award, which is for a documentary we did called The Builder, which is a very short documentary, about 7-8 minutes long, about a gentleman who was I think a Navy veteran, I forget exactly, but in Northern Ohio. And toward the end of his life, he developed memory loss. So he was a real vivacious person throughout his life, but toward the end, he started to have difficulty with memory. So what he would do, and he would find these, sounds basic, but it was a beautiful thing, these popsicle sticks, the little popsicle sticks that you get, and he would build things out of them. And he would build his childhood home, or he would build the schoolhouse where he grew up in. And by virtue of doing that, it would tag memories in his brain, and he could recreate, relive, and reattach a bit of his memory there. So it was a beautiful, heartfelt film, and that's where I won the Emmy Award for the score, and the film won as well for, I believe, Best Short Documentary.
What was it like after your whole lifetime of training and work in the music field to finally to get that award? And where is it sitting in your studio?
It's actually, I think it's right here. It's usually just right by the right by the piano. As I guess my ultimate source of inspiration is always the piano.
Fantastic.
But yeah, it's a good feeling. But as we were talking about earlier, it's a global award. It's an award that we all have won together, because it does take the whole entire team to make it work. If I just submitted the score by itself, it doesn't mean anything, right? Because there's no film attached to it. It's the people, and that's what I love about documentaries, because not only is it a creative project, but it's based on someone's life or a situation in history. And it has a lot of personal connection to people. And I think that's important. The flood documentary, we've heard so many comments and remarks from people that lived during that time, or that knew people, or that came from that area, and how it really impacts them, creates a memory and a reconnection to that event. And that's a special thing. And it's an honor to be part of that.
How cool to know that it's something that you've did enhancing a story like that. I always like the point of view of documentaries. Really great documentaries always make you think, and they kind of bring in something new. And the music is such a critical part of that. We do take it away, it's like it doesn't have nearly the impact. So it's so important when you hear a well scored documentary or movie. It just makes the entire experience complete.
It really does, and documentaries in particular, I think, are tricky. In any film, the dialogue is super important, but especially in a documentary, because you really are imparting knowledge, or you're on. So, as a composer, you have to be very careful when you're writing these things to bring out the elements that are important, but also stay out of the way. That's another bit of advice. As a composer, get out of the way when you don't need to be there.
That's a good one. That's what you
can. It's
the same in an opera.
Exactly, same thing in opera, right? Yeah. So being flexible with that. Another documentary, I think they're going to show a clip at the end that we just did, a short called The Long Hair, which is a fun documentary about an 86-year-old barber in North Dakota. And he was one of the last remaining barbers, quintessential barbers in that town. So it's about his life, his history. So for the score, I decided to try to find something fun, and you'll hear this in the clip, but I was thinking barbershop quartet, right? So, what is that? I'm watching the film, and something like, a little fun thing, in a more honed down fashion. But then you go back to the sentimentality of it, and that this is his last time in the barbershop, his last moments in the barbershop, so you need to have a different feel, right? So that's when the other theme comes in. Kind of this melancholy remembrance of time has gone by.
Large intervals,
right? Mm-hmm. And then putting them together. It
adds grandeur to that fun melody. That's really, I love that.
It is fun, and for me, I guess that's the way I write, is try to look at the character or the thing on the screen and attach a theme, attach an idea, and it's so much easier for me to write that way, because then I can take that theme and manipulate it throughout the course of the movie, depending on what's going on.
So after you won your Emmy Award, did that open up a lot of the doors for you?
It did. So as you'll find out for young composers out there, once a director likes your work and you're successful with the work, they'll keep coming back to you to continue that work, because it's a real situation of trust, where they trust that you've done a nice job with their movie that they've spent 10, 15 years on, and they will keep coming back to you. So our relationship between David Kuznicki and myself has been great, and we've created several movies, from The Long Hair to The Barber to The Town That Disappeared Overnight. And we have one coming up called Jutland, based on the Jutland historical event in 1926, another situation in New Jersey, where there was a battle, per se, between the police department and the farmers of the town over some, I think, an agricultural dispute or something like that. But it was a big story back then. So that's sort of our next project. But I've done other things as well with other directors. and the joy of technology is that you can work with people from around the world. We did a documentary a couple of years ago with a team in Romania who I did not meet initially, but it was a documentary about wooden churches of Romania, which are beautiful.
They have a lot of wooden churches in Romania, and old, really, really old.
Really old, and they're still there, and they're in pristine condition. And the director did a beautiful job with drone shots. And his perspective was really interesting because he didn't want a traditional classical score, which is typically what I'll do, right? But he wanted a combination of that plus sort of new age, ethereal kind of music. So if you listen to the score for that, it's this fun combination of strange elements with these beautiful drone shots going in and out, plus some traditional melodies as well. So it's great to have projects like that kind of push you outside of your box as well.
We're seeing more and more scores that are infused. Like minimalism has become such a huge a part of the toolbox, and almost every show I see, I turn on the TV. I'm like, that sounds like Orville Peart. That sounds like Philip Glass. Everyone's loving that. How do you adapt styles to make things work? How do you find the inspiration in different styles? Or do you find yourself using a wide variety of styles?
I do. So part of my compositional background is I've done a lot of musical theater as well. I was part of the BMI workshop in New York and have written a lot of shows and music for shows. And with that, you have to be able to write in a variety of styles, right? From jazz to traditional musical theater to you name it. So I've always enjoyed doing that. And film is sort of the same way. Like, the barbershop tune would work great for the barbershop film, but not for the Red River Flood, right? So you need to find things that are appropriate within the genre. So definitely you have to be able to experience those different styles, write in those styles with maintaining your same voice as well. That's one thing I admire about John Williams, especially if you listen to his early stuff from the 60s and 70s, a lot of jazz scores, a lot of kind of 70s music scores, but you can still tell it's him because his foundational elements, the melodies he writes, the harmony he writes, still akin to his writing within a different style. So I tend to try to aim for that as well. Be true to myself, but also express the style that's required.
Yeah, it's the most important thing is being part of the action and making your music mold to that sound and to add something unique.
Yes, indeed.
So have you done a lot of just fiction movies? And I know documentaries have been a big part of your repertoire. How many movies have you done?
I haven't really done a whole lot of scripted stuff. I did a sitcom pilot a while back called My Spirited Sister, which was kind of a fun spoof on some of these supernatural shows, a little bit of a comedy. But mainly it's been documentary films, which in a way I'm happy about because it kind of puts me into a certain area, a certain category, something I feel comfortable with and have had good experience with. But I'm very much open to doing other things as well, just to expand that variety.
Well, I hope that comes real soon because, it must be to do a 2-hour movie or something like that must take a real long time, and you have to recycle themes. And how much of that do you do in some of the longer documentaries? Do you use leitmotifs? Do you connect in that way?
Definitely, in this flood documentary. So this descending, Baroque kind of thing. If you listen to the score, it's throughout the whole passage, and it could be, various permutations. You can make it major. Sounds like a bad '60s song, right? But you could do something like that. But then you go back to the. Or I did a little fugal version of it as well. Et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, definitely. And that's why that important grasp on the film, on the emotion and developing of 5, 6, 7 different themes is really important. I think this documentary, I probably had 8 to 10 different themes throughout, just because there was so much variety and so many different topics within the documentary. But I enjoy doing that. And then it's just sort of it's like a paintbrush with a certain color, right? And then when that scene comes back again, you grab that same paintbrush and it might be a different stroke, it might be a different shade of the color, but you continue to to work. And if I find the score is more cohesive that way, if it's all connected from one root and everything kind of sprawls out. You take Beethoven 5, right? As we all know and love, well, that's it, right? But no, of course it's not. It's the development from that, and that's why it's so magnificent. Is that
all organic?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very much so.
All coming from the same two that descending third, and that becomes a world symphony builder. Right? It's an incredible universe out of that, like Tolkien building that out of the simple roots and simple elements. Nothing like Beethoven, right? We have a question from the audience. What's been the most challenging score you've set so far? What's a challenging project you've done so far to date?
The most challenging, I think, is this most recent one, the Red River Flood, given the length of it, given the complexity of it, and the timeline was fairly crunched as well. You have to submit for Emmy consideration in various festivals by certain dates, so they're hard and fast. And whether the score is done or not, it's going out the door. So it was a bit of a challenge, and to find the time to really dedicate yourself to that. And as you know, as a musician or as a composer, once you get into that headspace, it takes time to work through it, and you need that time. But another bit of advice is I would try to recommend to people to set aside that time every day if you're working on a project and treat it as a job, whether you're getting $1 million or $0 to some extent. You need to treat it as a craft and as a job. And again, nothing's too precious. Don't feel like if you write something, it has to be Beethoven. Well, of course not. It's your own music. Write it, get it out of the way.
Even Beethoven wrote Wellington's Victory. I remind people.
Well, yeah, he's a good example, right? Just crossing things out, and that's very much what you do. He probably would have been a good film score composer, or maybe not.
I wonder, like we certainly, the ones who crossed over into that period, we have certainly great composers like Copland and Bernstein who wrote for movies. So maybe he would, because he was trying to write opera. Certainly that was the way to make money back then, was to be a successful opera composer like Mozart.
Sure.
That was the kind of the ideal, right?
And Beethoven did some incidental music, didn't he, for various things here and there?
Certainly, for plays, sure.
And I always think of that as well, that as a composer, again, it's not just you sitting at a piano and writing this perfect piece that'll never be heard. Hopefully not. It's a piece of music that is meant for something, whether you're writing for a church or an orchestra or a film score or for a ballet. There's usually something connected to it, some sort of work associated with it, which, again, I find it easier. It takes away the importance of the music to some extent, and you realize that, well, I'm just part of it. I'm just part of the team.
Important part for sure, because without that music, it takes away some of that emotional impact that we all need. I love when you watch some of the grand war movies without the drums and the brass, or you watch the love scene without the strings soaring.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny, actually. It's like the Amadeus movie where they're doing the ballet and there's no music happening.
It makes a big difference. I've done a couple presentations at various universities on film scoring, and I like to show the throne room scene from Star Wars. The big fanfare, da, 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 right, and Chewbacca's doing this, and R2-D2 is beeping. But there's a clip, and you can find it on the internet, where there's no music; it's taken out.
It's
so
painful.
There's no dialogue.
It's just really cheesy.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you hear the Wookiee go and the beeping of the droids, and it's just ridiculous. So you do realize that it does make a big difference. Now, having said that, if you take that a step further and you put in a score that doesn't match at all, like, I don't know, a jazz score or what have you, then you realize you could completely ruin the movie, right? So there is that weight of importance on what you do.
Thankfully, people have lots of time on YouTube, and they'll put, like, Lord of the Rings, they'll put the wrong themes in, and it makes it hysterically funny and totally inappropriate and ridiculous, right. And you realize how important that is.
It is, and I think composers put a lot of pressure on themselves, because once you realize that, you're like, oh, shoot, if I don't do it right, it's not going to work. But again, you have to be willing to say, okay, sorry, I'll try again. And don't get too emotional about it. Don't get too attached, because next day you got to go right back to the drawing board and take a second shot.
Now, I know you've done a lot of musical theater in your working on any musical theater projects now? Or are you writing any shows? Or how do you balance your time and do stuff like that in addition to your film scoring?
I haven't in a while. I mean, the last show that I did, which was quite a while ago now, was Jesse James, Dead or Alive, based on the outlaw Jesse James. We did a couple of workshop productions in New York, which was a lot of fun, and I hope to get back to that one day. It's one of those things where was going really well, and then the film score stuff started to kick off, and I went more that direction. But I would like to eventually get back into musical theater as well. It's always
put it out there
enjoyed.
into the ether, the internet ether, because he's a very talented composer who can do so many things well, and I hope to see that too.
Yes.
Are you working on any? What's else on the docket the next couple months? Are you starting to look at projects, or what's?
We are. So there's the Jutland project that I mentioned, which is sort of the historical documentary. We're aiming to hopefully get a national audience for that. And then he's got a couple other short documentaries that are in the works. So there's always 4 or 5 different things on the burner, which is helpful. So
it's a busy filmmaker. Wow.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic. Has a really great eye, and tends to focus on really interesting situations, stories, and individuals as well, which as a composer is great because you can really attach yourself to that topic, to that character, and draw something important out from it, hopefully.
It's exciting. And where can we see some of these? Where can you see some of these pieces, projects?
Yeah, so if you go to my YouTube page, which I think is just Brian Katona at YouTube, a lot of them are up on there, or you could search for them. The Red River Flood, you could just type that into YouTube. There's a version of it out there before we put it out for national release. But yeah, it's all out there. You can listen to my soundtrack on Spotify. So if you type in my name on Spotify, there's an album that's been released of the Red River Flood, which is doing pretty well. It was just accepted into the Paris Art and Movie Awards, which is fantastic. So that's a
congratulations.
Big festival.
That's wonderful.
So we're excited about that and hoping the soundtrack will kick off.
Are you going to get to go? I hope you get to go.
I would like to go. I think they're on the fence in terms of if they're able to do something in person and to what scale. But sure, I'd love to go to Paris.
Always good to be in Paris, right?
It's always good to be there. There's a song right there somewhere.
It sounds like a lot of songs, right? Who doesn't love Paris? I got to go there for a good long weekend after doing a recording in Hungary. I made my layover there, and I spent one day in the Louvre. I'm like, I could spend a month or a year in here. It's incredible.
Oh wow! What did you do in Hungary?
I was doing a recording of rare French arias with the Szeged Symphony.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And we were in the beautiful Szeged Opera House, which was stunning, and the orchestra was like 120 players. They were fantastic. It was, and I ate some of the best paprikash that you can have. Every night was chicken with beef with paprika, and I just love paprika, so it was really a fun time.
That's amazing. My background is Hungarian, so I've yet to go over, unfortunately, but hopefully one day I'd love to. Very
good orchestras out there. We had the recording team was Hungaritone Records. Those guys really put some great recordings out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, Brian, tell me how COVID changed your working procedure. Now, we can do so much remotely. You've collaborated with a team in Romania. You've collaborated with North Dakota all the time. So, has that played a big role? Has it changed the way you work?
It hasn't in terms of the front process of things because I've worked remotely. I mean, David, who I did all these films with, I don't think I met him until probably a year into our working relationship.
That's wild.
This is pre-COVID, pre all of this kind of stuff. So the beauty of technology is that you can do that. The opposite end of it is the unfortunate thing that you don't have as much personal connection, which is important. COVID has shaped things, especially in the film world, in terms of, for us, it's film festivals. So we've submitted to a lot of festivals. Garden State Film Festival we were accepted into, but the turnout is not as large or not even possible during COVID, unfortunately. So it has been a very difficult thing for the film community, and things are starting to open up back again, which we're really grateful for. We're in the South Dakota Film Fest in September coming up for The Long Hair, which is the Barber documentary. And I think they're going to have some in-person presence, which is great. But we're just looking for that day when everything can kind of hopefully resume back to the way it was.
Are you anxious to meet the Barber or the people you're writing about? You're adding the music to their lives. Have you met any of these people?
You know, I did get a haircut today, and I was thinking it would have been nice if Leroy would have been there. I really haven't, although that would be kind of a neat thing because you watch, well, as a film composer, you watch the clip 100 times, 150
at least,
times.
Right? I imagine just to get to know them and to get comfortable with what the story is and to humanize them. It's such a personal thing.
It really is. And since I did the dialogue mixing too, you get the person's voice in your head, and you wake up and you hear Shears or something like this. So you kind of feel like you know the person, right? So it would be neat to meet some of these people. Having said that, when we did The Town That Disappeared Overnight, the first big documentary in New Jersey. We did meet some of those folks, and David, the director, films them and videos them, but I was able to meet some of the folks who lived through that. And I think that's probably one of the most special things, is to actually talk to those people and really understand their story and how important it is to them. And to hear them speak after they watch the film and recall those memories, that's probably one of the most rewarding aspects of it.
Well, congratulations on putting this together. Do you think that the COVID is going to change the recording industry, the way that film scoring is done? What impacts is COVID going to have that lasts to the next chapter when we come out of this?
I think in terms of film and theater in general, it's had a big impact. We have the benefit of all of the streaming services now, right? From Netflix to Hulu to Amazon, you name it. And I love them just as much as anyone else. And the original content that's put out there is fantastic. Having said that, there's something to be said about going to a theater, going to have that.
Yeah,
community.
I wonder, is that period gone? Is that like we're looking at like an anachronism that we've lived through, like something that was such an important part of life is now like are people going to want to sit in a movie theater still?
I don't know. I remember when I was a kid, the first time I saw Star Wars up on the big screen.
Me too. I saw Return of the Jedi with my father.
Yeah, and you remember that not just because of the film, which is fantastic, but because of being with your father and sharing the popcorn and sitting next to it and hearing the lady cough 3 rows down the row. That's all part of it.
Now we shun them in coughs.
Yeah, right. We went to see, what was it, Black Widow a couple of weeks ago when it came out, and the theater was fairly full, and it was nice to kind of have that experience. But then I forget the other film that we saw after that point, a few weeks after that, and pretty much empty. Maybe 2 or 3 people in the theater. And it's kind of a heartbreaking feeling in a way, because as a kid, I remember there's lines out the door to just get a ticket, right? But now everyone's sitting at home comfortably, watching their various streaming shows.
We have our devices and we are devicing, and I think it's the way of it's amazing how that's like podcasts. But in one regard, I think that every streaming service is going to be fighting for original content. So someone like yourself putting out documentaries, people love documentaries. So hopefully there's a resurgence in that, and we see that that work like yours gets seen by way more people.
Yeah, I hope so. So that's the benefit is there's so many avenues for content now, and it's almost overwhelming. It's like being in a candy store that's 10 stories high. There's so many things to choose from. So it's good and bad. But I don't think there's any stopping it. I mean, I hope people keep going to the theater, and I'll keep going to the theater because I love that experience. I like to give that to our kids, to give them that experience. But you can't fight the two-headed dragon coming down the road, and you have to be able to run with it and develop as things develop. Just like anything else, you have to be willing to let go and then try something different.
That was the question with the live broadcasts in the opera world. It's like, did live broadcasts help? Does it help? It does bring a whole other generation in to see the Met broadcasts, but does it take away the local theaters? Does it take away the local regional scenes of opera audiences? People think they're going to the opera when they go to the movies. And I'm always reminding them, you're not getting the actual live voices, which is a big part of opera, is hearing like acoustic live voices singing over an orchestra. It's a really exciting and visceral feeling. But
well, sure.
It is the two-headed dragon, isn't it?
Just sitting in the Met and watching the curtain rise and hearing those voices.
The chandelier goes up. Oh, it's exciting.
I mean, there's nothing like it. And to only show someone, oh, this is what it's like in a movie theater. Well, you're right. It's not the same experience. It is an experience, and it's a good experience, but it's not the original intention of the composers and everyone else.
Well, it's going to be interesting times as we move forward, and it's a grand experiment we will all go through together.
Yes, indeed.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us on Music Matters, and wish you continued success in your career, and can't wait to see that documentary and all of your projects coming up.
Thank you, Jason. Wonderful to talk to you and see you again.
Where can people go to find out more about you and your great work?
So you could search my name on Spotify, Brian Katona, or on YouTube, just Brian Katona, Katona. Also have a Facebook page, a SoundCloud. So those are easy, quick avenues to look at some of the content.
Well, thank you so much. We can't wait to see what's in store for the future, and hope you come back again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Jason.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. Like and share our videos, and remember, check out our past 200 episodes on www.jasontram.net. Thank you so much, and remember, keep music alive.
I was in barber school in 1952. I was 18 years old. It took me 6 months, 1,200 hours. The long hair come in 69, complete different haircut. And I was able to survive the long hair because every town had a barber at that time. You keep thinking you're really good, but when you look back, but you still are pretty rough for a long time.
When I met Leroy Pedersen, the barber shop looked exactly like the one I used to visit. It even smelled the same.
First haircut, I was in barber school, and I'd never cut hair before in my life, so they gave me a clipper on the second day I was there. So I was cutting and cutting, I was running out of hair, so I called the inspector to come over, and I said he wants a trim. And he says, how in the hell can I trim it when you cut it all off? Haircuts were $1 at that time. When we first went from $1 to $1.25, that doesn't seem like very much, but that's a big increase.
But gone was the lobby full of rough men, trading tall tales while they waited. The world seemed so much bigger when I was 10 years old.